off. It's dishonest when they say they're going to pay for itself. They're robbing the future. They're robbing the future, ripping off the middle class. And why? To reward their friends. Corporate America. Big tax break for corporate America at the expense of our veterans, our children, America's working families. This is really a disgrace. And so you can find out more about what's in the tax bill by listening to their friends, their lobbyists on K Street, because they know before the American people know, and certainly before members of Congress. But we have a message for them. Don't underestimate the intelligence of the American people. Hope they saw that lesson last night in suburban America, where people paid attention, understood the impact of the election. I'll just say one more thing before I yield to the distinguished leader, and that is, in our House, when someone gets elected, we seat them. We enfranchise their voters, Republican or Democratic. We don't say we have to wait for the paperwork. We hear the will of the people. I would hope that on the Senate side, your leadership would do the same. As Leader McConnell has said that in past elections. I know you'll remind us of that. But again, here we are, near the room where it will happen, but it's not happening here. It's happening someplace out of the light of day, with the speed of sound, to rip off the American people. With that, I'm pleased to yield to the distinguished leader.
Well, there's only one bit of good news that they're rushing this through. The longer they take on it, the worse it gets. Who would have thought they could have made the bill even less favorable to the middle class and more slanted towards the wealthy? But from what we're told, they're lowering the top rate from 39.6 to 37. That doesn't go to a single person who makes below about $300,000 a year. Only the top 1% will benefit from that change. So it's hard to figure out what goes on here from any logical point of view. Policy, a disaster. At the time when income distribution skews money to the top, more money is being skewed to the top. At a time when corporate America is spending most of the cash that they are so plush with on buybacks and dividends, not creating jobs, more money to do that. And at a time when the deficit is as high as it's been in a very long time, making the hole in the deficit deeper. On politics, it's a disaster for them. The public knows about this bill. They don't know all the details, but they smell what's going on, and that is tax cuts for the wealthiest, no help for so many in the middle class, and tax increases for a good portion of those in the middle class. And it's so amazing to me that last night showed that suburbs that are traditionally Republican are voting Democratic, and they do a tax bill that hurts the suburbs probably worse than any other place. It is amazing to me that in the House, members of the New York, California, and New Jersey Republican delegations could even dare vote for this bill, putting the interests of their wealthy paymasters above the interests of their state and their constituents. I believe they'll pay a very severe price for this bill in 2018. But it shows you the obeisance that they have to the 1,000 wealthy millionaires and billionaires who seem to run the Republican Party these days, led by the Koch brothers. Finally, I have asked Leader McConnell to delay things just as Harry Reid delayed things when Scott Brown was seated back in 2010. I've asked him that for the good of the country, but it would be good for the Republican Party, because if they have a bipartisan bill, it will be far more popular than the monstrosity they've put together behind closed doors, which I think, again, they will pay a price for, a big price for, in 2018.
For either of you, Republicans say that what they learned from the Alabama race is that they need to get things done to show the American people that they can govern. Is that the correct message to take
Well,
away?
when they say they need to get something done, it's as if you have a sick patient And instead of curing him, you chop off their right arm and say, we're getting something done. The patient isn't going to like it too much.
Does the election last night, particularly in the suburb areas of Alabama, make you more bullish that the House can retake, the Democrats can retake the House next year?
We've always been bullish about that. One of your associates asked me this morning, are people Democrats more energized? Democrats are very energized about that. But what this is about right now is saving the American people from a disastrous, as the leader said, monstrosity of a bill that's going to hurt our country. And that's where we want to keep this focus. I think they're in a lose-lose situation. If they don't pass the bill, they lose with their paymasters. If they do pass the bill, they lose with the American people. So I remember that while last night was glorious because of the quality of the person who won, how beautiful that he spoke about Alabama sometimes taking the wrong fork in the road, but not last night, and how he talked about CHIP, and how he talked about bringing people together and working in a bipartisan way. That's energizing to everyone in our country. But right now, we have to defeat this bill because even when we do win, to undo this will cost a fortune, and we shouldn't have to take this bad fork in the road.
But I think there are a lot of similarities in what happened in Alabama and what happened in Virginia. First, the base was excited and came out. I think they're excited because they see the positive things we are saying compared to what the Republicans and Donald Trump are doing to them. Second, the millennials are for us in overwhelming numbers. When you're going to make it harder to pay for college, when you're going to make it harder for the universities to give you scholarships, of course young people would be on our side. They're making it worse in there. And finally, suburbanites, the swing votes in most of America. They're taxing a good number of them. You know, increasing they're increasing the taxes on suburbanites in a very, very significant way, with the state and local deduction being modified on close to repealed. So the groups that seem to rally to elect a Democratic governor in Virginia rallied to elect a Democratic senator in Alabama. It's a very hard thing to do. And obviously we were aided by a candidate on the other side who had his own problems. But that was not the only reason. If it was just that candidate's problems and not the fact that the public understands that what they're creating in there and what they've been doing doesn't help the middle class, helps the wealthiest. If the public hadn't realized that, we still would have lost in Alabama with all the problems that Roy Moore had.
So do you think you could repeat the same success he had in the outreach he had to demographics that don't tend to favor Democratic voters?
Yes.
And by the way, there are many easier races to win than the race in Alabama.
If you had to distill the lessons that Democrats should take away from what happened last night, how would you describe it? What lessons should Democrats take?
A, be unified. B, focus like a laser on the middle class. C, work with your Republican colleagues when you can for some good alternatives. And we still are waiting for our Republican colleagues to come out of that room and actually work with us.
The other message I would say, associating myself with, of course, those three, is that this is about honoring our oath of office to the Constitution. Our founders were geniuses, and the genius of one of the genius parts of the Constitution is a system of checks and balances, and that is really an important message throughout our country, from a standpoint of values. From a standpoint of politics, get out the vote. I mean, that's just the way it is. But you can't get out the vote unless you have enthusiasm, unless you have inspiration. You can't run on empty. And I think that we saw what's happening here demonstrate a sharp contrast between Democrats and Republicans, and that helped get out the vote.
In the most fervent Republican districts, turnout was not up. In most of the Democratic areas, the Black Belt, suburbs, which is a swing area, the turnout was way up. Shows you who's enthusiastic and who's sort of a little downcast about their party's activities here in Washington.
Leader Schumer, the RNC and the NRST, they both said that Doug Jones should think about voting with the Republicans in Alabama, that the state still is overwhelmingly conservative. What's your reaction to those Republican efforts?
Well, we have, Alabama's not the most pro-Trump state of Democrats who are in the Senate. There are several more. All of our members from those states very much want to work with the Republicans. The Republicans don't want to work with them. They try to do their health care bill only with Republicans. They try to do their tax bill only with Republicans. We hope they won't repeat the same mistake when we do the end-of-year spending bills. When they act in a partisan way, they run into all kinds of trouble, passing bad legislation, doing it in the dark of night, and worst of all, creating legislation that the American people really dislike.
Thank you all very much.